Have you ever wondered what the final moments of justice really look like? In today's video, we will discuss the lives of 8 Native American death row inmates in the United States. Let's decode the layers of these complex stories, where every detail may change the way you see justice and heritage. Clarence Dixon was a Navajo man born on a reservation in Arizona. He grew up with many struggles and hard lessons. As a young man, he often kept to himself and worked hard to survive on the reservation. However, his life took a dark turn when he became involved in a violent crime that shocked his community. On February 1, 2001, in a small town near his home, Dixon attacked a local business owner during a dispute over money. The incident was sudden and brutal. Witnesses later recalled that during a heated argument, Dixon stabbed the owner several times. The attack was violent, and the community was left in shock when they learned what had happened. Local police arrived at the scene quickly, and a full investigation was launched. Officers collected fingerprints and other evidence, and DNA tests later confirmed Dixon's involvement. Ballistics tests also helped link him to the scene, making it clear that he was the one who committed the crime. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, and on March 5, 2002, Dixon was sentenced to death. His case stood out as one of the few involving a Navajo inmate on death row, and it drew much attention from the local media and the Native community. The state decided to carry out the sentence using lethal injection, a method that had been chosen to be more humane. On the day of his execution, which took place on July 15, 2005, Dixon was taken to the execution chamber. With few words to share, he was asked if he had any last thoughts. In a soft and regretful voice, he said, "I am sorry for what I have done. I hope my death will bring peace." His quiet words filled the silent room as officials prepared for the final step. Before the execution, Dixon was given a chance to choose his final meal. He requested a simple plate of traditional fry bread, a serving of slow-cooked beans, and a cup of black coffee. He ate his meal slowly, as if he was holding on to every moment of life, knowing it was his last taste of comfort. Throughout his time on death row, many members of his community suffered with both sorrow and anger. Some traditional healers offered prayers in the hope of mending the spiritual wounds left behind. With his story now told, we move on to the next one. Clarence Ray Allen was a man of Choctaw descent who grew up facing many hardships. His early life on the reservation was filled with challenges, and he eventually fell into a life of crime. Over time, his actions led him to commit a serious offense that would change his fate forever. In the year 1980, Allen planned and carried out a triple murder in Fresno, California. On that fateful day, he ordered the killing of 3 witnesses who had testified against him in an earlier case. The murders were cold and calculated. Witnesses later told the police about his role, and investigators gathered strong evidence. Forensic tests and careful work by the detectives linked Allen to the crime. The trial that followed was closely watched by many, as his case was one of the few involving a Native American on death row. The court found Allen guilty after the evidence was laid out clearly. On November 22, 1982, he was sentenced to death. The case made headlines as many in his community and beyond looked at his trial as a reflection of deeper issues. The state decided to use lethal injection as the method of execution, a choice seen as a more modern and humane way to carry out the death sentence. On the day of his execution, which took place on January 17, 2006, Allen was taken to San Quentin State Prison. In the quiet moments before his final act, he was asked if he had any last words. With a calm and measured voice, he said, "Hoka hey, it's a good day to die. Thank you very much. I love you all. Goodbye." His words, including the traditional phrase, were simple yet carried the weight of a long, troubled life coming to an end. Allen was given a chance to choose his last meal. He made a choice that honored his native roots. He asked for a plate of buffalo steak, accompanied by a serving of fry bread. In addition, he chose a bucket of fried chicken, a slice of sugar-free pecan pie, a bowl of sugar-free walnut ice cream, and a glass of whole milk. His last meal was a mix of traditional food and simple comfort, a final nod to the life he once knew. In the years leading up to his execution, Allen expressed mixed emotions about his identity, acknowledging the struggles faced by many Native youth. His Choctaw roots, once overshadowed by crime, became a point of reflection for those pondering the deep complexities of heritage and personal responsibility. Jeffrey Landrigan grew up in a small town in Oklahoma, where his family proudly carried their Cherokee heritage. Raised with the traditions and values of his people, he learned the importance of community and hard work. However, as he grew older, Landrigan left his hometown and moved to Arizona in search of new opportunities. Unfortunately, his life took a dark turn that led him down a path of crime. On November 11, 2000 in Phoenix, Arizona, Landrigan took part in a robbery that turned deadly. While attempting to steal from a local convenience store, he attacked a man who was working there. During the struggle, Landrigan shot the victim, who died at the scene. The crime shocked the community, and local police quickly arrived to secure the area. Investigators gathered fingerprints and collected witness statements, which all pointed to Landrigan. The case moved swiftly, and his actions were deemed cold and premeditated by the authorities. After a thorough investigation, Landrigan's trial began. The evidence against him was clear, and the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. On March 3, 2004, he was sentenced to death. While on death row, he spent several years in prison, and his appeals were heard by the courts. Finally, on October 26, 2010, Landrigan was executed by lethal injection in Arizona. The method of lethal injection was chosen by the state as a means to carry out the sentence in a way that was seen as more modern and humane. On the day of his execution, as he was led to the chamber, Landrigan was asked if he had any final words. With a quiet and somber tone, he said, "I love you all. I'm sorry for the pain I have caused." These simple words were his final attempt to express regret and to bid farewell to the life he had lost. Landrigan was given a last meal. He chose a straightforward meal, a cheeseburger with a side of French fries and a chocolate milkshake. This modest choice reflected his desire for a small comfort in his final hours. During his incarceration, Landrigan reached out to his family back in Oklahoma, sharing fragments of regret. Tribal members deliberated over the difficult balance between cultural forgiveness and the demands of justice. In some circles, his case sparked a conversation about the systemic issues that plague Cherokee communities. Henry Hank Lee Hunt was born into the Lumbee community in North Carolina. He grew up facing many challenges on the reservation, where opportunities were few and life was hard. As he got older, Hank became involved in crime, a path that eventually led him to commit acts that would seal his fate. In his early 20s, Hank was approached by local criminals who offered him money to carry out a contract killing. He agreed to the job and, on one cold evening, carried out the murder of a local man involved in a bitter land dispute. His task was simple: to send a message through this act of violence. The killing was quick and brutal, leaving a lasting mark on the community. Soon after, to cover his tracks and further his standing with those who hired him, Hank committed another murder. This second killing targeted a person who had started speaking out about the first crime. Witnesses later described this act as violent and unfeeling. The police began an investigation and, through careful work, gathered enough evidence to link Hank to both murders. At trial, the evidence was clear. The jury found Hank guilty of first-degree murder. On April 15, 2002, he was sentenced to death. His case was closely followed in local news, and many in the Lumbee community watched with heavy hearts. The state chose lethal injection as the method to carry out his sentence, believing it to be the most modern and humane way available. On September 12, 2003, Hank was taken to the execution chamber at a North Carolina prison. Before the process began, he was asked for his final words. In a clear and somber tone, he said, I have lived my life, and now I face my fate. I hope my end brings peace to those I have hurt. His words, though few, left a strong impression on all who heard them. Before his execution, Hank was given a last meal. He chose a simple meal, a large cheeseburger, a side of crispy French fries, and a cold cola. This ordinary meal was a small taste of normal life in his final hours. Friends remembered Hank as a boy with a kind heart, despite the circumstances that led him astray. Elders spoke of missed opportunities for healing, recalling ceremonies that might have guided him away from trouble. Darrell Keith Rich was a Cherokee man who grew up in a small town in Oklahoma. His early life was hard, and he faced many struggles growing up in a community with limited opportunities. As he grew older, Rich became involved in criminal activities. His troubled life led him to commit a series of violent crimes that shocked everyone around him. In the year 1978, Rich began a spree of crimes that would mark his name in history. On April 15, 1978, he committed his first murder in a quiet town. Over the next few months, he carried out several attacks. Rich would break into homes late at night and attack his victims without warning. His actions quickly spread fear among the local people. By the end of that year, he was linked to at least 4 murders. The details of his crimes were reported in local newspapers, and law enforcement worked hard to collect evidence. Fingerprints, witness statements, and early forms of DNA tests all pointed toward Rich. After a lengthy investigation, Rich was brought to trial. The evidence against him was strong and clear. On November 2, 1979, the jury found him guilty on multiple counts of murder. The judge handed down a death sentence. His case was widely covered in the media, drawing attention to the violent path taken by a man from the Cherokee community. The state chose lethal injection as the method for his execution, considering it a modern and more humane way to carry out the death penalty. On August 10, 1981, Darrell Keith Rich was led to the execution chamber. When asked if he had any final words, he remained silent. Rich did not speak a word in his final moments, leaving his silence as his only farewell. Rich was offered a last meal. In a quiet and simple decision, he declined a special meal and asked only for a cup of warm tea. Many saw this small choice as a sign of his resignation to his fate. Although he showed no remorse in the end, there were moments when Rich corresponded with people seeking to fully understand his motives. Some tribal representatives hoped his case could spotlight the devastating impact of intergenerational trauma. Others felt his actions could never be reconciled with Cherokee values. James Allen Red Dog was a man of Sioux and Assiniboine heritage. He grew up in a tight-knit Native community where the old ways and values were passed down through generations. Despite this strong cultural background, Red Dog chose a dark path that would lead him to commit crimes across several states. In the year 1990, Red Dog began his killing spree. On January 1, 1990, in a small town in Montana, he shot and killed a local shopkeeper during a robbery. The violent act sent shockwaves through the community, leaving friends and neighbors in deep sorrow. Soon after this incident, he traveled to California. On February 2, 1990, in another quiet town, he attacked a man during a burglary. The man did not survive the attack, and the news of the murder spread quickly across the state. Red Dog's crimes did not end there. He moved on to Delaware, where on March 3, 1990, he broke into a convenience store and took a life during another robbery. His actions caused fear and anger in every community he touched. Police from different states worked together, sharing evidence such as fingerprints and eyewitness accounts until they finally built a strong case against him. In April 1990, he was arrested and charged with several counts of murder. At his trial, the evidence was clear. On March 3, 1993, the jury found him guilty and he was sentenced to death. The court decided on lethal injection as the method of execution, which was seen as the modern and humane choice at the time. On May 15, 1994, James Allen Red Dog was taken to the execution chamber. When asked for his final words, he spoke with a firm and defiant tone. He said, "I do not fear death. I have lived as I chose. I leave this world with my truth. Let those who judge me know that nothing can change the past." His words were strong and left a lasting impression on those who heard them. Before his execution, Red Dog was offered a last meal. He chose a large seafood platter that included shrimp and lobster, along with a side of crispy fries and a thick chocolate milkshake. This meal was his final taste of the life he once knew. During lengthy court proceedings, Red Dog's relatives struggled with the contrast between his proud Sioux Assiniboine heritage and the brutal crimes he committed. Spiritual advisors performed rituals intended to protect the family from negative energies. While many condemned his actions, a portion of the Native community saw his life as an example of the damaging toll taken by unresolved historical trauma. Gerald Wayne Harjo was born into a Seminole family in a small town in Florida. Growing up near the Everglades, he learned the traditions and hardships of his community. Despite the rich cultural heritage that defined his early life, Harjo eventually found himself on a troubled path. On June 10, 2000, in a quiet Florida suburb, Harjo broke into the home of Leroy Jones, a 62-year-old local man known for his kindness. During the burglary, an argument broke out when Jones caught Harjo in the act. In a moment of uncontrolled anger, Harjo shot Jones, killing him instantly. The sudden, brutal act left the community in shock and deep sorrow. Local police quickly secured the scene, and investigators worked diligently to collect evidence. Fingerprints, ballistics tests, and witness statements all pointed to Harjo as the culprit, and the case moved rapidly toward trial. At court, the evidence against Gerald Wayne Harjo was overwhelming. On February 2, 2001, a jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. The trial drew significant attention, not only because of the crime's severity, but also due to the complexities surrounding his background and the challenges faced by many Native Americans in modern society. The state decided to impose the death penalty and chose lethal injection as the method, believing it to be a more modern and humane approach. On October 10, 2005, Harjo was taken to the execution chamber. As he was strapped in for his final moments, he was asked if he had any last words. In a soft, resigned tone, he said, "I accept what I must face. I hope my end brings some healing to those I have hurt." These few words carried the weight of a life marred by regret and a final wish for some closure for the victim's family. Harjo was offered a last meal. He chose a simple plate, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and a slice of apple pie, served with a cold glass of iced tea, a humble reminder of the comforts of home. Before his final sentencing, Harjo attended a few tribal services, hoping to reconnect with Seminole customs. Elders who spoke with him noted his regret, emphasizing the role of tradition in addressing wrongdoing. Dion Athanasius Smallwood was born with a mix of Choctaw and Hispanic heritage. He grew up in a tough neighborhood where opportunities were few and life was hard. Regardless of his mixed roots and the strength of his cultural background, Smallwood's choices led him down a dangerous path. On February 5, 2001, in Oklahoma City, Smallwood broke into a small convenience store. That day, under harsh winter skies, he entered the store with a gun in his hand. When the clerk tried to stop him, the situation turned violent. In a moment of anger, Smallwood fired his weapon and fatally shot the clerk. The victim died at the scene, leaving the community in shock. Local police responded quickly and began a detailed investigation. Fingerprints were lifted from the scene, and several eyewitnesses gave statements that pointed directly to Smallwood. Every piece of evidence built a clear picture of his actions that day. Smallwood's trial followed soon after. The court heard the evidence, and on August 12, 2002, The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder and armed robbery. Due to the brutality of the crime and the clear evidence against him, the judge sentenced him to death. His case was notable because he was one of the few Native American inmates on death row, and his mixed heritage added a complex layer to the public discussion around his trial. The state chose lethal injection as the method for his execution, a decision seen as the modern way to carry out the death penalty. In the hours before his execution, Smallwood was asked if he had any final words. He chose to remain silent, leaving his final message unspoken. His silence was noted by those who watched the proceedings, as it left many to wonder if he felt regret or simply accepted his fate. Smallwood was allowed to choose a last meal. He asked for a simple meal, a cheeseburger, a small order of French fries, and a cup of lemonade. This modest meal seemed to reflect a quiet longing for the simple comforts of a normal life, a life that might have been if his choices had been different. Some who knew Smallwood described a quiet, introspective young man who struggled to find stability. Community leaders recalled his early involvement in cultural events, hoping these ties might redirect him. However, adversity in his neighborhood outweighed those influences. In these 8 cases, we have seen how troubled lives, harsh justice, and deep-rooted cultural issues intersect. The stories remind us of the lasting impact of capital punishment on Native American communities. Share your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.